Yep,
Great.
I got it.
Thank you.
Maisy, you just give me the go ahead, okay?
Seems like our attendees, the participation has become stable. I think we can get going if everybody agrees. Rebecca, what do you think?
I trust your judgment.
Sounds great. Let's get started. I think that makes sense. And I will remind us all that we're being recorded and that these will be posted on our UMSEAS website. Thank you.
Shall I go ahead? Great. Welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased to have you with us today. For those of you who are finishing up your semester, I hope this is a nice breather in the last few classes of the semester. We would like to welcome you today to
I'll go around and
maybe let's see if we can
continue our circuit of
Rebecca.
our guests today. I wanted to start with Lisa.
Great. Thank you. Lots going on, as always. So we would like to welcome you to the UMC's Environmental Justice Lunchtime Lecture Series. Today we welcome anthropologist Gökçe Günel from Rice University and Professor Laura Beny from the Law School, with student Maisy Rohrer as the commentator at the end. We will, as always, hold off a bit on our land acknowledgement as we try to think freshly about that, our understanding of how we are thinking about Indigenous peoples. So I'll start with a brief introduction of Laura Beny, who is the Earl Warren DeLano Professor of Law at the Law School. Her work spans interests across Africa and includes issues of law, economics, finance and capital markets, international development, and political economy. She is the co-editor of a book referred to called Sudan's Killing Fields, Political Violence and Fragmentation. And she earned her MA and PhD in economics from Harvard University, her JD from Harvard Law School, and she has a BA in economics from Stanford University. Laura, we are so pleased to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us. Gökçe, we look forward to your conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you. My voice is a bit raspy today, and I'm not sure why. So I hope it's nothing serious, but thank you for the introduction, and I'm very excited to be here. I think that Rebecca is running a very exciting workshop, the Justice Agendas for Confronting Environmental Crisis. I've watched a few of them on videotape, and I'm excited about today's actually because for the reasons just pointed out, it does overlap with a lot of my interests, although my perspective is more legal and economic, but certainly no discipline is an island. And actually, in my opinion, the best work these days is interdisciplinary. So I do actually find myself in the course of law and development work looking into anthropology. And it's a subject that I think is extremely fascinating and always relevant. So I'm happy to introduce Gökçe Günel. She's an assistant professor at Rice University in Texas, and she's in the anthropology department. She has co-authored several articles and a book, and she has also authored numerous articles in prestigious scholarly journals in various fields, including engineering, anthropology, and also in popular media. Before she joined Rice University, she received her PhD at Cornell University in anthropology, and she has served as a postdoctoral fellow, Cultures of Energy Mellon Sawyer postdoc fellow at Rice University. She has also been a lecturer at Columbia University, an assistant professor in Middle East and North African Studies in Arizona at the University of Arizona. And the current book that she is speaking on today is Spaceship in the Desert, Energy, Climate Change, and Urban Design in Abu Dhabi with Duke University Press, 2019. And this book focuses on construction of renewable energy and clean technology infrastructure in the United Arab Emirates, which sounds very fascinating to me. And she's currently at work on a second book, which also sounds extremely fascinating. It's titled Energy Accumulation, and it's a critique of unilinear perspectives on the energy transition narrative. And she studies in particular a Turkish-built floating power plant in Ghana. So obviously many dimensions to that. And without further ado, I'm very excited, as I'm sure you are, to hear what the projects are about. So I'll hand it over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. This is it's very nice to be here, and it's very nice to meet all of you. So my plan for the day is to talk maybe for about 20 minutes about Spaceship in the Desert, and then have an extended Q&A where I can talk more broadly about the other projects I'm doing, and to sort of maybe think about what environmental justice means in each of those projects, or how it resonates. And in thinking about this talk, I think this talk also gave me the opportunity to think about some of the continuities across my different projects. So I'm happy to touch upon those continuities after this sort of the more formal part of the talk. So I'm going to share my screen, and 1 second. Okay. So in the year 2006, the Abu Dhabi government publicized its intentions to invest in renewable energy and clean technology infrastructures. And this investment would take the form of a multifaceted state-owned company called Masdar. And the hope was that the emirate would remain a significant player in the energy industry well after its oil reserves runs dry, or well after sort of, and it would also safeguard itself to fluctuations in oil prices. In the following years, Masdar, which means source in Arabic, became widely known for Masdar City, a futuristic smart eco-city that was designed by the London-based architecture office Foster and Partners to rely entirely on renewable energies. Masdar City would house 50,000 residents and 40,000 commuters, and it would be set on a 600-hectare area, and it would cost $22 billion. To look at computer-generated images of it, you might think it was a fantasy from a sci-fi comic, the sort I read as a boy, Norman Foster of Foster and Partners said in 2011. But Masdar City, a university city and an environmental technology park outside Abu Dhabi, is already being built. And here you can see the computer rendering of the Masdar City master plan, which was heavily publicized in the period between 2007 and 2011. So while the eco-city was central to Masdar's vision, Masdar also invested in renewable energy via its other operations, Masdar Power, Masdar Carbon, and Masdar Capital. Masdar Institute, the renewable energy research center founded by MIT, was opened inside the fledgling eco-city and started offering fully funded graduate degrees to about 200 students from around the world. And here you can see an image of the Masdar Institute dorms and labs situated at the center of Masdar City. And during the time of my research in 2010 and 2011, the students at Masdar Institute were the only inhabitants of Masdar City. So they, as you see in the rest of this talk, they played an important part in my fieldwork. My book, Spaceship in the Desert, maps and analyzes the production of Abu Dhabi's renewable energy and clean technology infrastructures, and it centers on the Masdar project and seeks to understand how an oil-rich country like the UAE prepares for a future with less oil. So I can talk more about the book during the Q&A, but in the rest of this presentation, I'd like to analyze the imagery employed in speaking about the futuristic Masdar City project in the years that followed its launch in 2006. Why and how did Masdar become conceptualized as a city of the future? And what did it mean for the project to be located at another time, in addition to being located within a bounded area in the desert, often conceptualized as an other space? So what, or perhaps when, was the future imagined through Masdar City? So a celebrated commentary regarding the futuristic aspects of Masdar City came from Laura's blog, where she emphasized how being there felt like living in a spaceship in the middle of the desert. Laura was an American student in her mid-20s, and she had moved to Abu Dhabi from the US with an ambition to learn more about renewable energy at the new Masdar Institute. And she had a bachelor's degree in engineering from a college in Massachusetts. In September 2010, after publishing this blog, Laura received unexpected attention from journalists around the world. The president of Masdar Institute and many other media like the Guardian newspaper recalled Laura's blog when reporting on developments at Masdar. Laura had a studio apartment on the new campus and had assumed her blog would reach a handful of friends and family members, and she later searched for reasons as to why and how this blog had become so popular. Since the 1960s, space travel technologies have inspired ecologically sensitive architecture, producing a blueprint for survival in the context of rising environmental concerns. The American space program of the 1960s had considerable impact on the ways in which designers imagined and planned eco-friendly life on Earth. So buildings would constitute self-regulating and decentralized systems with comfortable conditions for humans, provide enclosed shelters for an impending ecological disaster, and serve as a means of escape from possible destruction on Earth. And this is perhaps best symbolized by the well-known Biosphere 2 project, where in the fall of 1991, 8 scientists entered a glass and steel complex in the Sonoran Desert in Oracle, Arizona, about an hour outside Tucson, to test whether they could sustain their lives in a sealed environment, with the hopes that the model would someday be replicated to colonize outer space. In occupying buildings inspired by space technologies, humanity would behave like astronauts with clear outer space missions. And in these histories, the spaceship is a finite, technically sophisticated, and an insular habitat for an exclusive group of beings facing an outside world of crises. Now, the idea of the spaceship, and much like the submarine that preceded it, then serves as an extension of the ark metaphor, demonstrating the inevitable boundaries of human activities, vilifying the space beyond human habitability, and producing the outside as a vacuum that should not be inhabited. As seas full of mythical monsters surround the livable environments on Earth, the ship provides a safe interior space thanks to its strict boundaries, or as the German philosopher Peter Sloterdijk suggests, it acts as an autonomous, absolute, context-free house, the building with no neighborhood. And this way, the ship puts forward an alternative environment of peace and rationality, standing in opposition to the destructive and irrational crises on Earth. In prioritizing enclosures for some over collective survival, which is the tension that underpins most spacefaring movies, the spaceship also advances the principles of selection and endorses what Sloterdijk calls exclusivity dressed up as universalism. But despite saving only a very small number of people, the spaceship insists on addressing the planetary scale questions of survival in the unknown, the sustenance of the species beyond ecological catastrophe, and the preservation of an existing civilization, albeit in highly limited and confined form. Masdar City was conceived to perform the role of a spaceship in the desert, to maintain the lives and livelihoods of its residents by relying on renewable energy and clean technologies. Sorry, somehow. Okay. In December 2010, Fred Momanzadeh, then president of Masdar Institute, appeared in a CNN documentary by Richard Quest about Masdar City. He explained that when the US wanted to send a man to the moon, it produced NASA. And now when the UAE wants to transform and diversify its economy, it builds Masdar City. In his autobiography, the leading Emirati entrepreneur and businessman Issa Al-Gurb asserts that Emirati rulers understand the desert as a moonscape. He describes how Sheikh Rashid of Dubai dismissed the moon landing as a hoax, arguing that the landscape looked like the empty terrain in Ras Al Khaimah, one of the 7 emirates that make up the UAE. Maybe it was filmed there, Sheikh Rashid said. So how can you understand the impetus to compare Masdar City with the moon landing or with a trip to outer space? The Laura's spaceship analogy helped the producers of Masdar City in promoting the reconfiguration of the desert as an undiscovered resource frontier from which a novel means of livelihood would emerge. The analogy also served as a conceptual extension of the multiple Orientalist projects that the British or the French undertook in the 19th century in order to make a certain form of life possible in the arid geographies of Arabia. In this new adventure, the frontiers people of Masdar City would be in charge, both abiding by the principles of the Abu Dhabi government and taking the initiative to produce a next generation of innovators. The frontier people would help Abu Dhabi ensure its survival after oil by substituting fossil fuels with renewable energies. And according to this destiny, the students would take charge as astronauts, managing the successful institution of a new resource economy within an oil exporting country. Meanwhile, Masdar Institute students, the frontier people of Abu Dhabi's emergent eco-city experiment remained unsure about the translatability of Masdar City into other settings. On February 1st, 2011, they gathered in the Masdar Institute auditorium to debate whether Masdar City is an elite enclave of sustainability unsuitable for the rest of the world. The graduate students who came to Masdar City from countries including the US, China, Egypt, Jordan, Iran, Turkey, and Iceland were struggling with such questions and wished to think about them in the context of a debate club performance. The team that perceived Masdar City as an elite enclave of sustainability argued that Masdar was too unique to be applied elsewhere. For one, Masdar was very expensive. Which other country other than the oil-rich UAE would be able to devote $22 billion for an eco-city? Second, they recalled how this project had been put together to contribute to the economic diversification of Abu Dhabi and perhaps would not be financially feasible or meaningful for other countries with different economies. Masdar City was expected to help the UAE transform its brand image from oil producer to technology developer, to induce a perception shift, possibly attracting foreign investment or facilitating the creation of local startups focusing on renewable energy and clean technology. Third, the political climate of Abu Dhabi was working in favor of Masdar City by providing prolonged commitment and stability. The government often served as a steady source of financing for the project. In this understanding, Masdar City would remain an island contingent on a specific set of circumstances only available within the UAE. Abu Dhabi's oil capital, its future economic vision, and its political environment were thus perceived as preconditions for launching the spaceship. In response, the team that defended the global applicability of Masdar City proposed that the eco-city should be understood and framed as a prototype. Abu Dhabi would shoulder the burdens of building the eco-city and others would benefit. Every new idea is expensive, one of the students underlined. Think about the car. First, rich people had it, and now it's spread all around the world. Masdar City could become less expensive in an undefined future. It could be exported to other countries as a whole in the same way that the car and its infrastructures have been exported. In the meantime, the experiments taking place at Masdar would be learning experiences for students, researchers, and faculty, opening up global horizons for research on renewable energy for eventual adaptation to other regions in bits and pieces. At the end of the meeting, one student approached me to express his dissatisfaction at how none of the students on the debate teams had actually defined what Masdar City was, or what exactly they expected it to spread around the world. No one talked about the personal rapid transit units or the motion sensors, he specified, pointing to the technologies that define the eco-city for him. What would Masdar pass on to the rest of the world, he wondered, and what exactly was the future that the eco-city promised? On November 10th, 2010, some weeks before the official opening of Masdar City, Daniel, a Foster and Partners architect overseeing the master plan, gave a talk about their design process. The students who organized the debate were in the audience. His slideshow included a lunar image juxtaposing a space module with the gray lightweight cladding of the laboratory buildings on the Masdar Institute campus. The laboratory facades were composed of insulating cushions that, the architects explained, shade the interiors of the building and remain cool to the touch under the desert sun. Yet while the technological infrastructure of Masdar City was critical to the project, the architects also emphasized how they learned from old Arab cities in designing the eco-city. Daniel's slideshow, in fact, began with references to cities that had architectural principles akin to Masdar. Aleppo in Syria and Marrakesh in Morocco were among the cities that inspired the city's master plan. Many of these cities also had narrow streets, shaded windows, courtyards, and wind towers. The audience, mainly Masdar Institute students and researchers, listened carefully and examined the image that Daniel showed, a bird's eye view of Shibam in Yemen, taken by George Steinmetz, a National Geographic photographer. A student raised his hand to ask a question, interrupting the presentation. But does Shibam really exist? Have you ever seen it? Daniel replied that it was too dangerous to travel to Yemen these days, so he had never been to Shibam, and added how he would love to go there someday. But sure, Shibam existed. This city, or this historical artifact, as Daniel framed it, had been one of the primary inspirations for building Masdar City, an eco-city that strove to be located in the future and that had its roots in a uniquely Arab past. In these presentations, the old city of Shibam lost its social, political, and even material qualities and became part of the imaginary world of Masdar City. Did Shibam really exist? No one in the audience, including the architects, seemed to have experienced Shibam firsthand. Seen in a bird's eye view photograph in the Foster and Partners slideshow, Shibam's qualities complemented those of Masdar. Shibam stood in for a mythical Arab past, relegated to lost history and unapproachable geography. In this context, Masdar City not only served as the materialization of a displaced longing for this past, it also epitomized the expectations for a mythical Arab future under construction in Abu Dhabi. The official opening of the Masdar Institute campus, perhaps a metonymical representation of Masdar City, was scheduled for November 23, 2010. And the students had important roles to play in the opening ceremony. And here you can see some students posing with Norman Foster, and this is the then President and First Lady of Iceland. And these are the Icelandic students in the image. So a day before the event, all students received an email attachment with instructions on where they would be stationed throughout the ceremony and how they would approach the high-profile visitors to the building, such as Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan and Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. The document specified, you need to identify yourselves and greet the guests by saying, thank you for coming to Masdar Institute inauguration. We're delighted to have you here. We will show you to the PRT cars. While 6 students were to welcome visitors at the PRT station, 14 others were asked to be present at the Knowledge Center, reading, working on laptops, checking books at the first floor of the library, so as to allow the visitors to experience the building in operation. The remaining 100 or so students would be stationed at different locations on campus at different times. The students were provided with a fact sheet with answers to questions such as, what makes Masdar City special, as well as reference points for their potential conversations with guests. They would redeploy Masdar's marketing and promotional campaigns, this time through informal conversations, while making use of the half-working material artifacts on site as props. What they staged would serve as a natural representation of the future of Masdar Institute, with busy students absorbed in their work, reading, working on laptops, checking books at the first floor of the library. When presenting the Institute, it somehow made more sense to introduce that abstract future rather than showcasing the current state of indeterminacy the fledgling institution was trying to overcome. In this performance, the students did not only pretend to exist in the future, they also demonstrated the perpetual potential of the project. Here you can see the PRT station. Congrats. So these narratives were very significant in shaping Masdar, but before closing, I want to take a quick look at exactly how the spaceship gets fueled. And in this image here, you can see the beam down concentrated solar power station, which was a collaborative project carried out by MIT and Masdar Institute researchers inside Masdar City. And as some of you may know, Abu Dhabi is perceived to be a perfect location for harnessing solar energy. However, according to Mahmoud, a 30-something Egyptian-born engineer at Masdar, this perception was not completely accurate. Upon finishing his PhD at an American university and wishing to be closer to home, Mahmoud had accepted a position at Masdar as his first job. As we chatted outside this solar power station, he stated that high levels of dust and humidity were blocking direct solar rays and causing thick coatings on the solar panels, diminishing their effective functioning. Although we can't fix the first problem that easily, we found a solution for the second problem, he continued. We call it a man with a brush. And here is an image of the man with a brush. And you can see the Masdar Institute building in the back there. In Mahmoud's understanding, the man with a brush, a worker dedicated to gently wiping away dust and mud from the solar panels, became part of the picture only to reveal the infrastructural potential embedded within the solar panels. Man with a brush could perform a feat that extensive technological innovation couldn't so far handle, and therefore was fundamental to the emergent renewable energy and clean technology sector of Abu Dhabi. The man with a brush was South Asian, or perhaps from the Philippines, and he shared a room with other workers in a labor camp outside Abu Dhabi, and he walked around the Masdar City site cleaning solar panels on a daily basis. Overall, the immigrant labor force served as a most effective and essential resource for the materialization and functioning of renewable energy and clean technology infrastructure in the UAE. Yet these humans who were making the infrastructures work were most often perceived as disposable tools. Masdar City attempted to help humanity fight climate change and energy scarcity problems, but its understanding of humanity was particular and selective. It did not include the man with a brush. In this context, Masdar remained an exclusive project that aspired to prolong the current social and political conditions by making use of technological advances, design solutions, and business models. It supported a conception of utopia or science fiction that did not take into account an improved future for the whole of humanity. The implication was that the status quo was already a best-case scenario. The producers of Masdar already inhabited this utopia, even though this utopia did not necessarily plan for the man with a brush or many others who were not included within its confines. In constructing an eco-city, they were building a limited notion of what humanity means and strengthening existing social boundaries. At Masdar City, oil would cease to be the main currency. Driverless electric pods would replace cars, and environmental problems would be avoided through meticulous research and technological discovery. Relayed as a science fiction style narrative, the social and political injustices did not seem to matter much. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen here.
Thank you, Dr. Günel, for sharing your work and your thoughts about Masdar City with us. Before we open up for discussion, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land we are symbolically gathered on today in this Zoom webinar. The University of Michigan stands on the traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe peoples, who are also known as the people of the three fires, Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. Along with their neighbors, the Seneca, Delaware, Shawnee, and Wyandot nations, the Anishinaabe lived on and stewarded the land now known as the Great Lakes for hundreds of years before settlers created the colonial state of Michigan. The university was granted this land in the Treaty of Fort Meigs in 1817. At that time, Anishinaabe were promised higher education for their youth. That promise is left largely unhonored by the university to this day, and our building of communities and conversations is a mindful step towards action on these crucial justice agendas. As Dr. Bartlett mentioned at the beginning of our time together, we're interrogating the ways in which we acknowledge violence and harm across this lecture series. While words are not enough to change the past, we seek to extend and deepen our recognition of the metaphorical spaceship we occupy as we share and build knowledge here. Through this practice, we're acknowledging the perpetual potential held within only partially completed processes, such as reconciliation. The innovation that is engendered by iterative adjustments can thus be best conceived not as steps toward a finish line, but as drivers of new possibility. Embedded within the layered metaphor of the spaceship and underpinning the very idea of Masdar City is this colonial concept of the frontier, exploring the unexplored in order to retain the status quo or even improve life for a select few. I wonder if these new frontiers comprise also new forms of elitism and hierarchical social structures that buttress and give rise to invasive and oppressive practices, such as technocratic monitoring that occurred within Masdar of the employees and students. It is through disruption of conversations and practices, not unlike malfunctions that occurred in the Masdar's building management system, that we can begin to substantively dismantle and remake the systems that perpetuate violence that began with colonization. We learned from Dr. Günel's work that the exercise of reviewing and remaking our understanding of the past shapes how we project and protect possibilities for our future. I see the importance of these lessons that you have conveyed to us reflected in my own positionality as a student and burgeoning professional. I'm receiving your work in conversation with other projects on my plate that challenge the economic incentives, political forces, and social considerations that reconfigure physical infrastructure into reflections of societal norms and systemic injustices. As I work through these problems, I'm undergoing a partial process within myself, scaffolding my knowledge upon pathworks of case analyses and theory as a student to produce an amalgamation of possibilities for my personal future and professional future. As such, your thoughts are now part of the cues for and construction of my navigational path towards focusing on energy justice that moves beyond these early concerns with distributive justice and into questions of dialogue, agency and innovation, and value creation. And so we've heard from Dr. Günel that while the people in Masdar were intent on building a city of the future, that has largely not been realized. I would invite the audience to ask questions and be a part of this discussion with us. Thank you, Dr. Günel, again. I've been wondering myself as an anthropologist, your work has been disrupted, as we've discussed about other ways of disruption, but particularly disrupted by the current pandemic we are in. And I was wondering if you could speak to how that has affected your work going forward and what you've learned from your past anthropological work that you would like to bring to the future.
Thank you so much for that beautiful commentary and for your question. I think it's quite a big question in some ways, and I can respond to it in multiple ways. But maybe I'll in thinking about disruptions to research or disruptions to thinking, I can sort of bring forward a project that I've been doing in collaboration with my colleagues Saiba Varma and Chika Watanabe. And so as anthropologists, most of our work relies on ethnographic field work, and there is a sort of an understanding of a sort of a very sort of coherent process of doing ethnographic work in our field sites, and sometimes, especially now for students who are doing their PhDs in anthropology, or for other scholars who were or who wanted to be engaged in ethnographic research, pandemic was a big rupture. But even before the pandemic started, so Saiba Varma, Chika Watanabe, and I were in the process of thinking about a project on that we call Patchwork Ethnography, trying to sort of question how researchers' subjectivities affect the process of doing research. So in anthropological research methods, there's always been a sort of a conversation on how our interlocutors' subject positions affect the way in which we do research. But now we want to sort of flip that question and think about how the researchers' positionalities affect the processes of research, sort of trying to bring together, trying to see how life and work come together, and trying to sort of also foreground the seams and the seamfulness of research. And in a way, I think our project received a lot of attention because of the pandemic, but it's a project that started before the pandemic, when we were trying to navigate our personal lives and our professional lives, and trying to think about what our research would look like in the future. Specifically, it actually came from a conversation that Chika and I were having about, Chika was trying to figure out how she could sustain her relationship to her partner who has a regular job, like working at, not an academic, can't take long time off from work. And how is that going to work with as she starts leaving for long periods, if she continues to leave for long periods of time? And I said, oh, it seems like you're doing patchwork ethnography. Anyway, this is perhaps too long of an introduction to the project, but but our work on sort of thinking about patchwork ethnography and trying to sort of see the patchiness of life and research together has been a sort of an empowering perspective for us, and hopefully for the people who've been following our work, to see that, you know, the pandemic is one, I mean, it's, of course, it's very disruptive, but it's one amongst many different kinds of disruptions that we've experienced, and that researchers have always responded to these disruptions with creative solutions and doing a patchwork, being patchworkers, and thinking about, and we want, but unfortunately these practices have not necessarily been seen as legitimate. So now, since what basically in the past year, what we've been trying to do is to enable a to call for a coming out of the closet, I guess, with different kinds of research practices that ethnographers have used and have benefited from, and perhaps we can all share those practices openly and honestly, and see what's been useful to each of us. So we're organizing a webinar we're hoping is going to be quite extensive in responding to some of the questions that we've outlined in the manifesto that we published, that's been posted on the chat, and hopefully the webinar will, and we've received more than 100 submissions to the webinar. So we're hoping that it's going to be a useful space for people to brainstorm about their shared problems and offer some, again, empowering solutions. One of the people who read the manifesto told me that it generated a sigh of relief in her. So this is very important for us, and this is the kind of response we want to generate in all of our collaborators and readers and whoever is willing to sort of, whoever is going through these disruptions, whether due to the pandemic or to other kinds of precarious life conditions, disability, mental health issues, etc., etc. So there's a range of things that I think have been sort of left outside the have been black box in anthropology, range of conditions that researchers have always suffered from. And so maybe it's the pandemic is giving us a space, an opportunity to open that black box and think about how we can move forward without necessarily letting ethnographic research fall into the cracks. We love doing ethnographic research. We want to be able to continue doing it, but we also want to acknowledge that maybe it's not as uniform as it's made out to be. Yeah, maybe that's been the sort of the most, I think, again, exciting project I've been doing in the last year in relationship to these research disruptions.
Well, thank you. I want to point out that the manifesto for patchwork ethnography that Dr. Günel has authored is in the chat. The link for it is in the chat. I highly encourage that, checking that out. But I want to go back to what you said about your own positionality as a researcher and how that played a role in your work at Masdar, because you were living nearby and you were going very often. And I believe you worked on other projects while you were there as well. Maybe you could talk a bit about how your positionality impacted your interactions with those you met at Masdar, and how that brought Masdar and this project to life for you and changed it in ways that it did.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I started doing research at Masdar, on the sort of the emergence of Masdar City, thinking that I would be able to live on site with the students in the dorms. But early on in my research, I found out that I had to apply for a security clearance in order to be able to live in the dorms. And although I applied for the security clearance very quickly, as soon as I heard that this was a requirement, a response to my application never materialized. So I found myself living with a good friend of mine from college in Dubai, and going to Abu Dhabi every day, by sharing rides with different people. So many of the people who worked at Masdar City would live in Dubai and commute on a daily basis. So the drive there would be about an hour and an hour back. And I made a list of all the people who were doing this drive. And so tried to sort of diversify as much as I could, the kind of the people that I was commuting with. And the space of the car became a really important space for me in thinking about the renewable energy and clean technology in the UAE. So I was able to reflect on the conversations I was having with others at Masdar City, with the people that I was riding with and that I was commuting with. And those people became very helpful sort of interlocutors who would ask me new questions about my research, who would direct me to new resources, etc. So, this, and while I was at Masdar, I would divide my time mainly in two spaces. The first was the Masdar Institute, where I had a position as a researcher, and my position as a researcher was aligned with a project that they were doing on developing an energy currency. So the project, the Masdar City wanted to, well, one of the projects happening there was to sort of see if the national currency, the dirham, could be replaced with an energy currency called Argos at Masdar City, and to try to sort of understand what that replacement effort would look like. And so I was part of that project, and I wrote about that project. It's one of the chapters of my book is dedicated to that project. And at the same time, I was collaborating with people at Masdar Carbon who were producing a climate change policy submission on carbon capture and storage to the United Nations. So carbon capture and storage is a controversial sort of technology on climate change mitigation technology, where you bury carbon dioxide in mainly in depleting oil reservoirs, and this leads to a process called enhanced oil recovery. So by storing carbon dioxide in these oil reservoirs, you're able to extract more oil. It doesn't necessarily have to happen in depleting oil reservoirs, but most of the work that was happening in Abu Dhabi took this shape, or what that was planned to take this shape. And so another chapter in the book is dedicated to the work of producing climate change policy on carbon capture and storage. So in both of these projects, where I had roles as a sort of minor roles, mostly as a sort of like a research assistant, but these positions gave me the ability to follow the projects quite closely, and get to know the sort of different kinds of different decision makers in each of these projects, and gave me also the space to ask them questions about about their reflections on the projects, whether their expectations on the projects were being fulfilled, or if they were seeing big gaps that they weren't necessarily that weren't being satisfied, etc. So both of these, and it also, these projects were also really helpful in just structuring my days. Again, I've had 2 cubicles in 2 different buildings on the Masdar City site, and so that daily routine was really helpful for me in allowing me to understand the sort of the larger dynamics at Masdar City, and allowing me to also meet a lot of people from different parts of the project. And so, for instance, one of the questions that we're asking now with the sort of the Patchwork Ethnography project is, if you're not able to do this kind of year-long research project where you're not necessarily able to follow these kinds of daily routines, what does your research look like? How does it transform? And one of the things I'm seeing, or that all of us are seeing, is the emergence of these larger routines, so maybe annual routines, where you return to a place each year and where you meet the same people each year. And so that daily, even if you, at times, if you're not able to preserve that kind of daily routine of going to the same place with the same people, seeing, having lunch at the same cafeteria, etc., and maybe there's a way in which that can be sort of scaled up to be a sort of a yearly routine. And so with the Patchwork project, all three of us are immigrants. Saiba is from India and Chico is from Japan, and I'm from Turkey, and we all live in different and work in different countries, well, in the US and the UK. And we've also come to realize that the immigrant experience is becoming a resource for us in thinking about our research projects, because we are used to returning to a place year after year. We, as much as we can, I mean, I guess and we're coming to realize that we have this set of practices that we've used in order to maintain our connections or develop new connections with the places that we're from over the let's say 15 to 20 years that we've been away from the countries that we're from. So maybe that allows us to sort of shift that. That serves as a resource for thinking about our ethnographic research projects as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And so we have some questions in the chat that I wanted to make sure we got to. And in thinking about ethnographic work and capturing the culture and the inner workings, someone made the observation that it seemed that Masdar and its production seemed a bit soulless and unsustainable. Do you have thoughts about that? Because to me, it seems that it just was based in the urban design and on urban concepts and not environmental. But maybe you have thoughts that you would like to share.
I think I mean, in the book, I describe the kinds of strategies adopted at Masdar as technical adjustments, which are basically ways of responding to the climate crisis that take the shape of technological innovation, business models, or design solutions. And across the board, these kinds of these technical adjustments actually offer substitutes to already existing habits or sort of the forms of living. So, in some ways, my goal in the book is to make Masdar City as uninteresting as possible, and to say that Masdar City is actually, it might seem as this sort of strange esoteric project, but it's actually not that different in thinking from, let's say, an electric car, where the imagination of the car doesn't necessarily change, and the imagination of, let's say, private transportation remains, active and valid, but the fuel for, running the car is replaced, and which enables, let's say, which enables us as humans to extend our lifestyles into the future, and without questioning the sort of the social, political, relations that those lifestyles draw on and stem from. And so I think I think in the book I also give the example of, let's say, the biodegradable plastic bag. So let's not get rid of the plastic bag, have the plastic bag, but maybe make it biodegradable. These are the kinds of solutions or responses to climate change that I'm seeing everywhere. And so I think Masdar City is as soulless as those solutions in some way. So I think it's and yeah.
Going off of that, because this type of innovation can lead to just reproductions of the status quo, I'm so sorry, ignore my dogs. Do you believe that it is important then to infuse more of this ethnographic style research into the field of energy justice and innovation?
Yeah, I think it's very important, because so now I'm doing research on the Turkish floating power plant in Ghana, and one of the things that I've noticed, for instance, there is how the introduction of solar panels to the sort of the Ghanaian grid has resulted in higher prices, higher electricity prices, making electricity harder to access for most of the country, basically, most of the consumers. So, and I can explain why that happens. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because I think for some people, clean technology and renewable energy have this hold this sort of power where if we only switch to renewable energy and clean technology, all of our climate related problems will go away. But renewable energy and clean technology don't necessarily resolve all of our social, political, and environmental problems. And in some ways, and this is also what I tried to show in my presentation today, they strengthen the boundaries between the haves and the have-nots. And so rather than sort of, sort of making innovation the sort of the sole solution out of the climate crisis, maybe it's important to sort of interrogate innovation or clean tech or renewable energy innovation more specifically, and see the kinds of continuities rather than ruptures they rely on. So what kinds of extractive practices do renewable energy and clean technology extend into the future? And so I think ethnographers have done a good job. My colleagues here at Rice, Dominic Boyer and Simini Howe, have both worked on projects on wind power, for instance, doing questioning the sort of the ways in which renewable energy systems are set up in Mexico. And so I think, and that this kind of critical work is, I think, important to do, and ethnography is a useful research method for making it happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. We have another question though that, and I think this goes straight along with this, is how have manufactured environments such as Masdar alienated people from ecology and this discussion of the spaceship being like an internal versus external mechanism of boundary making? What do you think that the impact could be on human relationships with non-humans and nature?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And for one of the projects that are happening at Masdar was the sort of the person rapid transit project, and I think I showed a picture of one of the pods during the presentation. And in order for there was a sort of a space called the Undercroft, which was the basement of the Masdar City, let's say, master plan, sort of a constructed basement, and in this basement, the PRTs would run, and there's are like automated pod cars. So, but they kept having problems, and one of the people on the PRT team said, it's because we have birds coming in. So in order for the PRT to function well, there had to be no birds inside. So it had to be a fully sealed tunnel, but this was not. This was hard to do for various reasons. And so the relationship with non-humans also becomes very instrumental in this context, where there is a sort of the non-humans are only invited or allowed in order to sort of help that vision of the sort of the resource frontier, or support that vision of the resource frontier. So So as long as they sustain the sort of the technocratic dictatorship, I think that was the basis of the project. And at the same time, for instance, one of the projects that some people at Masdar Institute were doing at the time was a biofuels project, and that project relied on the mangrove forests on the coasts of Abu Dhabi. And so mangrove forests became sort of like an important sort of topic amongst the researchers, but again, only because they serve this kind of instrumental purpose of extending the renewable energy future.
Wow, that's very interesting. But so looking at the time, I just want to make sure we have enough for this last question. We're going to go back to this concept of patchwork ethnography and how you will be using this in the near future while COVID and this pandemic are still here with us. Somebody has put in the chat that they are going to be using more video chats and videos to send around to colleagues on the ground. will you be using similar, similar technology channels we have?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I would say, please come to our webinar and listen to the many different responses people are going to give to this question, because I think my response is not going to be necessarily representative of all the, the richness with which people have responded to the call. But from my perspective, I'm trying to think about sort of, first, I'm trying to see how the method of patchwork ethnography should be reflected in my writing, because the research that I've done with many short trips to both Ghana and Turkey, let's say I don't want to necessarily represent it as this kind of seamless, process of doing research. I want to be able to show how the kinds of my other responsibilities to my family, to my job at the university, etc., have shaped the way in which I've done research. I want to be very honest and explicit about that. But at the same time, I want the sort of the various interactions I've had and various research experiences I have to also be laid out in their sort of partial ways. And this is not necessarily many people have written about sort of partial knowledges and how ethnography is always incomplete, etc. So this is not necessarily something new that patchwork ethnography is saying, because, but I think it's also important to write in a way that shows that kind of that incompleteness of our access, of our sort of experiences. So that's one way in which I'm trying to think about it. And another way is I'm trying to also think about collaboration and what collaboration should look like in our as we go further. So I've met many people, for instance, in Ghana in the energy industry who are very experienced and knowledgeable about the transformations of the grid, etc. So I'm trying to see if there would be a way in which I can collaborate with them in a fair and sort of manner. And so one of the issues that we've been discussing is sort of to see how relations with collaborators should be structured in order to ensure ethical participation in the project that's mutually shared and that's mutually sort of that acknowledges the way in which each person sort of thinks about the project. So again, we've received a lot of responses to this question as well, and I think it's not necessarily something we're going to be able to resolve very quickly, but we're trying to sort of think about the existing existing sort of resources people have formulated. So yeah, I think that's one of the, and I think I'm just going to continue to try to do the short-term research trips that I've been doing in the near future, as well as once the sort of once travel becomes more possible. But again, until that point, I think it's not like we should just stop being curious about things or asking research questions, but beyond the sort of the digital technologies and using, we all use digital technologies often to stay in touch with people. So that I think goes without saying that it's part of our research methodologies now, although they're not maybe necessarily framed as such. But yeah, what are some other methods we might have beyond those that are already in our sort of roster?
It's very interesting just to see all the different ways people are reacting to this opportunity. But I think we are going to be closing down our webinar. This was a wonderful talk. I could go on and on with you. You're so knowledgeable and your work is so fantastic. Thank you so much. Dr. Harden, Dr. Bartlett, would you like to close us out?
Only to say that it is true that it's the end of a semester for many of us in academic settings, although this lecture is public facing and will circulate beyond the confines of our campus in our broader beloved community of environmental justice practitioners, advocates, activists, and scholars. I do know that the fact for the academic participants, the fact of the matter is it's 1 o'clock and it's still the academic year. So many folks have had to jump off already and are writing notes to thank us very much for the content. So we will indeed stop the recorded portion of this lecture now. I want to thank out loud, as I did in the chat, both Laura Ben, Melissa Bartlett, Maisy Rohrer, and Gökçe Günel for an amazingly rich session today that has been so thought-provoking and such a departure from the more Michigan-based in our own backyard kinds of talks that we've had, and with clear connections between this kind of global engagement and in our own backyard projects and work around infrastructure and power. So thank you so much for bringing that to the table. And I do want to let you all know that I'll be following up with the archive, which has gone live on our environmental justice website. This will be added to it very shortly. I'm blown away. So I'll stop the recording. If anyone wants to hang out and chat briefly on the forum, we can do that. Let me take care of that.
Thank you so